What's up, everyone? Vinny Musso from Musso Athletics here for day 17 of our 30 days of force. Still talking about force redirection and isometrics. So today I want to go a little bit more into detail about the benefits, particularly of isometrics, when it comes to rehabilitation and injury prevention. So, rehabilitation from injuries, if we have suffered an injury, and if we haven't suffered an injury, the big thing that isometrics help with to prevent us from getting injuries. So that's what we'll talk about a little bit today. So if we talk about we talk about rehab first, again talking specifically about isometrics. So again, if you're not sure what isometrics are, I suggest going back, watch the videos that we've previously done talking about that topic. Just a quick explanation, quick summary of isometrics. Basically, it's muscles firing without actually moving. Okay, if you want more details, I suggest going back and taking a look at the isometric video where we went more into detail about that. So looking at isometrics for rehab, isometric movements, isometric muscle contractions are very popular in rehab protocols, and oftentimes it's the first step of protocols. In my past working as a physical therapist, working with a lot of post-op patients, patients that have gotten hip replacements, knee replacements, ACL repairs and reconstructions, all kinds of injuries. Many times the protocols that a therapist would receive from a doctor, isometrics are going to be in that first part of rehabilitation, particularly again if we are dealing with joint injuries, ligament injuries, tendon injuries. A lot of times, or not so much tendon injuries, ligament and joint injuries are very common to have the rehab process from recovery from injuries or surgeries for those injuries. Oftentimes the protocol will start with isometrics. And obviously, if you doesn't, not hard to figure out, why, but the major reason is we're able to, work our muscles without moving, the affected joint. So that's the huge benefit and incredibly important. Again, as I've said, I've worked as a physical therapist in the past. Still work with people who deal with injuries. So obviously still utilize that part of my education. But I see this definitely a lot in particularly more like an inpatient physical therapy setting where I've had experience working with clients both in school during training and then out of school in the actually working as a licensed physical therapist. But off the top of my head, I can't remember the numbers exactly, but it's something along the lines of 1 day of bed rest. So 1 day of bed rest, so think about people in a hospital who spend a lot of time, sometimes all day, literally in bed. So one day of bed rest will decrease your muscle strength and muscle fiber recruitment efficiency to a point where it takes you lose so much in a day, but it takes weeks to build that back up. Just from 24 hours of no muscular contraction whatsoever. But oftentimes the problem there is someone who coming off of a surgery, or they're just so dealing with an injury that they can't get out of bed, they can't move, even like something rolling over in bed is difficult to do. Isometrics are definitely something that could be looked at there. Again, because we are able to work the muscles without actually moving. So the muscles are firing, but the joint is not moving. The muscle, really is not lengthening or contracting. So we're able to get, the benefits of keeping our muscles firing properly, without having to deal with, risking further injury if we do have a joint injury, or we're just the person is so injured or frail or bedridden that they can't get up and do something, they can't actually move their joints and muscles. We can still get benefit and prevent the negative side effects of being bedridden for 24 straight hours. So no, kind of off topic, compared to what I originally was going to talk to, but definitely a good thing to touch on. So again, isometrics, very very popular, very key to the early part of our rehab process, and another reason that it is so important in the early stages of a rehab process is not just because we can work our muscles and have them fire without risking further injury to a joint. But if you think about it, the first, after we're coming off of an injury, obviously we want to train to prevent injuries in the future. And unfortunately, once you have suffered an injury, you're going to be more prone to injuring that. So if you injure your left hamstring or your left knee, and your right side is completely healthy, there's a higher chance of you re-injuring that left side, that left hamstring or left knee, because even though we recovery, any type of perfect rehab process, we're not going to be fully back, absolute 100% compared to what we were before the injury. There's always going to be just a little bit shy of getting back to that full absolute function that we had prior to an injury, whether that's strength, range of motion, or things along those lines. So obviously we want to fight against that, and we want to do all that we can to decrease the risk of injuring that again. So the benefit of isometrics, and this goes back to what we've talked to in the past, is we talked about how isometrics help you recruit more muscle fibers and help you recruit them more efficiently. So basically, they help your muscles stay as efficient as possible before we get back to movement. So we teach the muscle to recruit more muscle fibers and recruit them more efficiently in a static environment where the muscle and joint are not moving, and we can work different lengths if we do have an acceptable range of motion that we're allowed to work with. But again, before we get into more of the heavier strengthening stuff where we're going through a fuller and deeper range of motion, isometrics can help the muscle fibers become more efficient before we go into more advanced and higher intensity exercises. So again, whether you're this is really geared for people in the physical therapy world. If you're not doing isometrics early on, strongly recommend it because there's definitely benefits to it. Maybe you're someone who coming off an injury yourself, maybe not so bad of an injury that you had to go to therapy or had to go to the hospital or have surgery or anything. Maybe you're just tweaked an elbow, tweaked your arm or something, knee or hamstring. You're trying to kind of find different ways to rehab it by yourself. Starting with isometrics is definitely a good way to go. Again, because we're able to work our muscles without joint movement. So a decreased risk of re-aggravating a joint injury if we have something like that. And again, another key, along with being able to work the muscles without the joint movement, kind of lays the base and the foundation for our muscles to get back to being more efficient with recruiting muscle fibers before we go into the more advanced exercises. Okay, so that's just touching on why isometrics are so key in the rehab and the injury recovery aspect. We move over to injury prevention. So again, we obviously want to, let's say we've recovered from that injury we're rehabbing from. We don't want to just completely throw isometrics out. Isometrics are definitely still very beneficial for injury prevention. So if you look at our first point here, so we're able to work muscle lengths that are prone to injury. So think hamstrings often are very injuries that are muscle groups that get injured very often. Oftentimes because they're just kind of less efficient and weaker compared to the more dominant front of the leg, the quads. Where most people are quad dominant and not hamstring dominant. So oftentimes that can lead to injury, and oftentimes hamstring strains. Not only will happen, we talked about the benefits of slower eccentrics, way back on like day 2 or 3 maybe of this 30 days. We talked about how a lot of the times on the absorbing part of a movement, so landing from a jump, kind of, absorbing a stride when you're running or sprinting. A lot of injuries will happen during that absorption part. But probably the second most amount of injuries happen on that transition from absorption to force to production force. So that quick change from absorbing to producing. And oftentimes those transitions happen at a muscle length that is weaker. For those of you who are very experienced in the strength and conditioning world and in the physical therapy or the rehab world, we know that the most a muscle is at its strongest when it's midway through its range of motion. So if we look at my bicep, this being my bicep fully lengthened and this being my bicep fully contracted, my bicep is most strong here, midway through that range of motion. So oftentimes, when we're doing weightlifting, or kind of like our traditional weightlifting movements, it's tough to work those other ranges of motion, just because it's not as efficient to work those more drastic ranges of our motion. So trying to work this part of the bicep at this length and this part of the bicep at this length is difficult to do during traditional weightlifting. One, because this is kind of no fault of human. Humans will, a lot of times the body's going to try to find the easiest way to do something. So if we are moving a weight that's heavy, you might, I see this with bicep curls all the time. If you go to a gym, you see someone kind of just half repping and kind of, again, staying through that middle part of the range of motion. So again, we've mentioned how that's when the muscle is strongest. So your body's going to say, okay, well, this is where I'm the strongest, so I'm going to try to stay in this range of motion. Okay, so it's difficult, to really force yourself to go through full ranges of motion, during resistance training. So the way we can kind of fight that is with isometrics. So kind of on that topic, how we're strongest here in the mid-range, we're most prone to injury at our weaker, points in the range of motion, such as when the muscle is fully lengthened or when it's fully contracted. So those are the points in the range of motion where we're more prone to injury. So what isometrics do is they allow us to work those muscle ranges that are more prone to injury. So we can, particularly for the lower body, the hamstring example that we used, we could do, a single leg RDL hold at ranges of motion that we're not used to getting to, during a regular single leg RDL. We can, consciously tell ourselves, okay, I'm getting in this position and I'm just going to hold it there. Okay. And the benefit there, again, which we've talked about a lot, what isometrics do, they help us recruit more muscle fibers and help us recruit them more efficiently. So, you can understand that if we can get to a muscle length that is more prone to injury in a controlled and a safe manner, and then work, those muscle lengths to become more efficient at recruiting more muscle fibers, then you can put together how that's going to reduce our risk for injury. Because again, another common time in kind of the force production cycle where injuries occur is on that quick transition from absorption to production. And that transition happens at muscle lengths that are more prone to injury. So if we can isometrically work those muscles at those ranges that are more prone to injury by teaching them to become more efficient, then we're going to decrease our risk for injury. And again, prevent us from having to go back to here on the rehab side where we do have an injury, now we're trying to recover from it. So a really good technique to kind of build off of eccentrics, because we've talked about the importance of eccentrics for injury prevention, we can build off of those and kind of combine those two. So another technique that's pretty popular, not only for injury prevention and injury reduction, but just kind of for functionality and kind of teaching the body how to move, is eccentric isometrics. Okay, so eccentric isometrics are just what they sound like. They are combining eccentric movements with isometric movements. So let's just use a squat as an example. So we've talked about eccentric squats, tempo squats we've called them, where you're taking a good 4 or 5 or 6 seconds on the way down and then quickly changing direction and exploding back up. Our eccentric isometric would be, let's say, 4 seconds on the way down when we hold the bottom for 4 seconds before we explode up. Okay, so we're really getting the benefit of eccentrics and isometrics all thrown into one exercise. So we're getting kind of, two for the price of one in terms of injury prevention, because we're working eccentrically to strengthen ourselves during the absorption part of a movement to work on preventing injuries. And then we're also getting the benefits of isometrics by holding a position that is more prone to injury. And again, teaching our muscles to become more efficient at firing and recruiting muscle fibers, so we can more efficiently and in a safer fashion to reduce injury, switch from absorbing force to producing force. So we're getting the injury prevention part of it, and in terms of the functionality part that I mentioned too, it's almost an example I like to use for this is, and that's another, it's a baseball example. As for any of you baseball fans out there who have gone and watched baseball, I'm sure you've seen a lot of players kind of working on their mechanics in slow motion. So a lot of times I'll see guys in the on deck circle taking practice swings, not just at full speed, but kind of slowing it down, just so their body kind of feels, what it's supposed to do before it gets up there and kind of goes, full maximum power, maximum force. So it's kind of almost like teaching your body, the right way to move, kind of like a learn how to crawl before you can walk, and then learn how to walk before you can run kind of concept. But doing movements in a very slow, deliberate, and controlled manner just kind of teaches your brain the right way to move. And obviously, if we teach our body how to move correctly, in the correct fashion, we can see how that's going to also prevent injuries as well. Okay, and then if we move to our last point here, isometrics also increase our tendon and ligament durability. So again, anytime we're doing any type of movement, going through a range of motion, our tendons and ligaments are working. But if we're going, quickly through those movements and ranges of motion, they're not getting a whole lot of time under tension. We all kind of know how, time under tension, the benefits of that. So doing isometrics, increases our time under tension, so the time that the muscles are working, the tendons are working, and the ligaments are working. So that is, the tendons and ligaments view that as progressive overload if we increase the time under tension, and they're going to respond by, kind of hardening up, or, becoming more resilient, just overall, stronger connective tissue. And obviously you can understand that if connective tissue becomes stronger and more durable, it's going to be, it's going to decrease the risk that we could see injury in those areas. Okay, so that's another benefit of isometrics in terms of injury prevention. If you look at this last point here, which is starred, not going to go into a lot of detail about it today. It's kind of like an intro for tomorrow's video, but it increases what's called tendon stiffness. And I know a lot of times, we kind of view tightness and stiffness as bad things, but in the case of our tendons, it's actually beneficial to us to have kind of stiffer and tighter ligaments. But that's all I'll say today for it. I won't go into detail about it today, because it's kind of beyond the scope of our rehab and injury prevention. But this stiffness concept will be kind of a teaser for tomorrow's video. So stay tuned for tomorrow to check that out as we go into more detail about our tendon stiffness. Okay, so I'll do it for day 17. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, share the video, and if you haven't had a chance yet, go ahead and check out Amuso Athletics on Instagram for more training content. See you guys tomorrow.